Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Greg Regal. I'm a partner at the McGuireWoods law firm. I also have the privilege of being the managing partner in our Tysons, Virginia office. And on behalf of the entire firm, I'm very pleased to welcome everyone to this hopefully informative and interesting webinar. A couple of brief housekeeping matters before we get into the substance of the topic. If you're new to one of our webinars, there is a mechanism to pose questions to the panel, and we will do our level best to keep an eye on that as we go through the program and try to respond either in real time or potentially at the end of the prepared remarks, just depending on the nature of the question and how it may fit within the discussion. In the event we have more questions than time allows, we'll also commit to follow up offline with specific questions and feedback. And all of these webinars that we've been doing during the course of the pandemic are also available online if you want to go back and listen, and or they're forwardable to others in your respective professions or colleagues that may not have been able to attend. So with those preliminaries out of the way, I did want to give a brief introduction to the topic, and we'll try to get into the discussion as quickly and efficiently as possible. But this was advertised as a session on community engagement. And what we've tried to do is pull together as many divergent perspectives on the topic as possible. You will hear today from people that are active developers, both in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and also nationally. You'll hear from government officials, senior government officials. You'll hear from citizen perspectives, and perhaps a unique perspective from a company directly involved in some of the technology that drives the evolving forms of community outreach. And when we put this topic together, I think one of the things that struck us immediately was, frankly, the commonality among those divergent perspectives as to the value and the importance of good outreach. And we're going to talk today about how the pandemic has, if anything, perhaps moved that ball forward. And I think have an interesting question in terms of, once we're past the pandemic, and fingers crossed we all get to that point sooner rather than later, to what extent do some of the things that have been done on a, if you will, an emergency basis, perhaps have durability going forward in terms of expanding the reach, expanding the diversity of participation in the land use process and things of that nature. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to throw it to my partner, Scott Adams, to briefly introduce the panelists, and then we will get into the substance of the discussion. Scott, please.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And welcome again to everybody. As Greg mentioned, I'm Scott Adams. I'm a partner here at McGuireWoods, where I also chair our land use practice. And very excited to introduce a great panel that we've got this afternoon. And I'm going to go just alphabetical order for everybody who's on the panel. Starting with Barbara Byron, who is the Director of Planning and Development for Fairfax County, which is just under 1.2 million people outside of Washington. And Barbara's had a long, illustrious career in Fairfax County. Prior to her position, she served as the Director of the Office of Community Revitalization, also the head of the County Zoning Evaluation Division. In her current position, Barbara oversees, among other things, comprehensive planning, zoning development reviews, revitalization efforts, and also administration and updates to the county zoning ordinance. So welcome, Barbara. Next, we have John Damron with CRC Companies, and John's a development executive with CRC. John's a Virginia native who's worked for nearly a decade in the real estate development industry for the likes of JBG Smith, Wood Partners, and CRC Companies, focused primarily on market rate multifamily development. And John received his Bachelor's of Science from the University of Virginia's McIntyre School of Commerce and his MBA from the University of North Carolina's Keenan Flagler Business School. So welcome, John. Next, we have Dan Green, and Dan is a principal at Wheelock Communities, where he's responsible for residential land and home building. And he's helped Wheelock Communities build a portfolio encompassing more than 24,000 residential lots in a dozen communities coast to coast. And Dan has more than 30 years of experience, national experience with land acquisitions, financing, entitlement, development, and sales. So welcome to Dan. Rob Jackson is our next panelist, and Rob is the president of the Mclean Citizens Association, where he was recently elected to another stint, and previously he served as, I think I'm correct, as the longest serving president for that organization. And he also served as the chair of that group's planning and zoning committee. The MCA was founded in 1914 and is a citizens group based in the Mclean area of Fairfax County, Virginia. The group represents citizens and smaller HOAs within its boundaries, and it also reviews and advises on redevelopment applications and planning efforts impacting community within its jurisdiction. So welcome to Rob. And I guess also when Rob is not volunteering his time with the MCA, he is also a telecommunications and technology attorney based in Tyson, Virginia. So welcome to Rob. Next panelist is Casey Nolan, and Casey is the Senior Managing Director at CRC Companies. And since starting with Clark, which was the predecessor to CRC Companies in 1997, Casey has led numerous development efforts and been involved with over 6 million square feet of development in the residential, commercial, and retail context. His experience includes site acquisition, entitlements, financing, and execution of the firm's development projects, as well as leadership on Clark's largest public-private partnerships in the DC area. And Casey's responsible for the firm's entitlement practice, which includes over 2,000 planned multifamily units. So welcome to Casey. And last but certainly not least is Megan Ruble, and Megan is the North American Head of Client Services for Bang the Table, which is a global leader in online community engagement. And she manages the team that supports Bang the Table's 300 plus local, state, and federal government clients in the U.S. and Canada. And prior to joining Bang the Table, Megan led a marketing, communications, and community engagement team at the city of Lakewood in Colorado. And she lives in New York City. Is a Master's of Public Administration candidate at NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. So welcome to Megan. And with that, I will turn it back over to Greg to into the.
All right, let's get going. And I'll note for the record, Scott's making me look bad by putting a jacket on, but hopefully the constraints of business dress or something that also goes away post-pandemic. But I wanted to start with a sort of the value proposition of these notions of engagement and actually start with a developer perspective. And I think at times there's perhaps a perception or maybe a misperception that developers are brought into community engagement kicking and screaming. And I think you're going to hear kind of an enlightened perspective from the representatives we have here as to the value they get from that type of engagement, both in terms of making good decisions in the land use process, but learning about the communities that they ultimately are intending to be part of. So maybe we'll start with CRC perspective. So Casey or John, if you want to jump in and give us your perspective on the need and value and the benefit as briefly as you can.
Sure. And Greg, give me a thumbs up. You can hear me? That's good.
Yes.
All right. So from our perspective, we see community engagement as just one part of the development process, but very important. And I put it in the bucket of it's really stakeholder engagement. So as we're planning something that's going to go into a neighborhood and a community, it's natural to want to hear the feedback around that project, as well as the feedback from the municipality. And so as I think about what does engagement mean and how do we define success, what we want to do is just be as effective as we can. And so we're working right now in 3 Northern Virginia municipalities. Each has its own process. They're generally very similar. And how we think about being effective is making sure as many voices can be heard. And what's interesting from my perspective, as soon as March 13th happened and the world changed very quickly, is the community, the development community, the local community, and municipalities very quickly transitioned to a virtual world. And so I think what we found is, going back to how do you be effective, you have to figure it out. And it's interesting that this pandemic, in a way, has accelerated things that, online engagement platforms, online meetings, they've always been available, but from our perspective, have been underused. And what that has meant is sometimes the existing process, we maybe haven't been able to reach out to as many constituents as possible. And while this is my job and what I do, I know many friends who ask me questions about what's going on a certain project. But when you have one or two working parents traveling, lots of things going on, not many people may have time for an 8 p.m. Wednesday night meeting. But if it's actually done online and it'll be recorded, what we think is we have an ability to really embrace this engagement process. And I'm excited about the potential of like kind of transitioning this kind of in a post-COVID world. I'll stop with that,
We'll talk
Greg.
more about that. And thanks, Casey. Dan Green, anything to add? I know you are a professional community engager, if you will, across the country in many respects.
Yeah. I would say that this is a big piece of everything we do. While we have a lot of experience in master planning and real estate development, and we hire high-powered experts to help us with all that, I think every time I do one of these, I really try to approach it with a blank slate as we talk to the community. It always seems to come out with a better product than if we sat down in a conference room and threw it down on paper what we would normally do. To hear the local flavor, the neighbors, and also there at the end of the day, economically, we got to remember that they will be our customers in this community that we're developing. So I like to do that with a blank slate and listen to everybody. Obviously, we put in our flavor as well, but it's a great process.
Thanks, Dan. And I'd like to get kind of the municipal perspective and the community's perspective as well from Barbara and Dan, accepting we're going to have a little more focused discussion on some of the specific notions of diverse and underserved groups a little later in this program of sorts. But Barbara, maybe you can give us the municipal orientation to start with, and Rob will invite you to chime in from a community stakeholder perspective as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. So as everyone else has said so far, and I'm sure the panelists after me will say, you can't do land use without community engagement. We have been, for the last several years, trying to figure out ways in which we can expand our engagement. Our previous chairman, Sharon Bulva, convened a group to look at how we could expand our engagement process. And ever since then, we have tried to figure out new and innovative ways to do it. As Casey said, this COVID, which we'll get into in a few more minutes, I guess, has provided us opportunities quicker than we ever thought. But nevertheless, it's something that we were looking at and has been part and parcel of our work since the beginning. If we don't engage in the community, we fail. And it's, from our perspective, it is much better to engage early and often. The worst thing that can happen to us is to have someone come out late in the process that says, I've never heard about this, or nobody talked to me, or I didn't know about this, and this really affects me. When that happens, all it does is derail things. And so we're constantly on search for ways in which we can engage the community early in the process. Can't always agree with everything that everyone says, and frequently there are many different perspectives. But it's critical for us to know and understand what those different perspectives are so we can work through them, try to reach consensus as early as possible on our projects.
Very well said. Rob, welcome, and certainly invite you to comment as well.
Thank you. Maybe just a little background of what the Mclean Citizens Association does in terms of reviewing land use cases. We generally look at every case within our boundary, which is basically the same as the Mclean Planning District that the county has set up, most of which is in Drainsville, but we do have parts of Tyson's Corner in the Providence District. What we look for is basically compliance with the comprehensive plan, the zoning ordinance, and other applicable laws. If waivers are sought, are they reasonable in scope? Are they justified? Are they limited? And then we also work with various community groups, homeowners associations, smaller community associations, and we try to get their point of view. But we we push for addressing those concerns when they're reasonable. Just because someone doesn't want a project in their neighborhood does not push us to oppose the project. What's their concern? Can it be addressed in a reasonable manner? Is there room for compromise? And with that standpoint, I think it's important because most developers come early and come to work with us. And in most instances, we are able to support their project either in total or in part.
Thanks very much, Rob. And I think, obviously great alignment on the need and the benefit. And I think, at least from the developers on this panel, you see a very clear notion of ultimately land development being a partnership with the local government and the community. And I think, I suspect clear subscription of that notion by everybody. And that's maybe a good place to start the more evolved discussion. So as advertised, I'm going to throw it to Scott to talk a little bit about what's specifically happened within COVID and what's changed. And Scott, please take it away.
Yeah, and I think to Casey's point and Barbara as well, I think a lot of what we've seen in community engagement is that with COVID, it's accelerated some of the changes that we were seeing over time. And so I may start with Megan, and maybe you can talk a little bit about from the perspective of a technology provider for community engagement, what you've seen in terms of changes since COVID hit in March.
Yeah, I think what's been said so far about COVID being an accelerant by Casey and then again by Robert was absolutely correct. We have seen a rush to move processes online, whether that is land use planning or budget conversations at the municipal level. And it's important to note that the technology component of this work is really a bridge. It's the bridge that kind of extends between you and your community, but the technology in itself won't do the work for you. So much like Microsoft Word will not make you a good writer, purchasing community engagement software will not automatically create a trusting relationship with you and your community. So it serves as the catalyst for that work that you're already doing in your communities. You're just having to find some new and interesting ways to do it. The things that we've learned in the past couple of months as far as a participant's perspective goes with online engagement is that people care very, very deeply about privacy and security. So making sure that those technological spaces are safe and secure for everybody. We've seen a lot of desire for ease of use, having a one-stop place to give that feedback, to get information about a project, instead of having to go to a bunch of different places to fill out survey links here and read information here. We're really seeing a call to make this easy for me. The world's pretty chaotic right now, so we need to try to make that online engagement piece as simple as possible. And then the third thing that we've learned is that it's really important to have multiple modalities in the online engagement space. So you want to give people opportunities to participate in ways that feel comfortable to them. So for some people, that might be filling out a survey. For other people, that might be sharing a personal story or watching an online meeting.
And I mean, are you seeing with your clients any spike in amount of online or response from
the audio is cutting out just a bit for me. I don't know if that's only on my end, but if you could repeat that question, that would be great.
Yeah, I will repeat that. I was just curious, if you were seeing increased numbers in terms of the number of participants from the community side with some of the your clients.
Yes, absolutely. Particularly for the people that went out early. We see a bit of fear when it comes to doing online engagement work because there's a perception that the online engagement will be an amplification of the angry mob that might show up to a public meeting. And done intentionally, online engagement is not that space at all. So the people that have gone out very quickly with their revised processes, with their new processes, and have gone kind of fearlessly into this space, knowing that they're not going to get it right, and with a little bit of a willingness to be vulnerable and iterate as they go and learn as they go. They've seen tremendous response rates, largely because people are at home, they're in front of their computers, and they're really interested in connecting with the community around them.
That's great, thank you. And Rob, maybe getting the citizen perspective, I know to appear before the Mclean Citizens Association, I think have been some of the changes that the organization in terms of facilitating some of the online engagement. Maybe talk about some of the changes that MCA has made over the past couple months.
Yes, Scott, thank you. We took a hard look at what we're doing. I mean, normally we would have we assign one of the members of Planning and Zoning Committee to be the case manager and work with the developer, work with the county staff, work with the supervisor's office, the neighborhoods, and learn about the project, and then come prepare a resolution that the committee considers and then sends to our board of directors for approval, at which time we would advocate that before the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. What we decided in the MCA is we're using a variety of online tools, from online meetings for some committees, but the Planning and Zoning Committee is basically doing everything by email. We have asked the developers for their basic documents or the links thereto. We've shared them with the committee members and given them a period of time to develop questions. We send the questions back to the applicant, get answers, and perhaps with some back and forth follow-up, and then prepare a resolution that way. So we have been flexible among our committees as to how we are addressing things.
Yeah, and I think maybe to editorialize a little bit on our end, I think from the perspective of those who are taking development projects through, it seems to be working and running fairly smoothly. So I think everyone is appreciative of those efforts. Barbara, maybe you can talk a little bit about how Fairfax County has changed some of its community.
Hey, I'm not sure, you're breaking up again. Would you mind repeating it?
Yeah,
I think the question, Barbara, was how has Fairfax County changed or evolved its outreach and communication as a result of the pandemic?
Okay, thank you. So I'm a real believer in bad things breed good opportunities. And I guess I would consider the COVID pandemic to be one of those very bad things, but has bred some really good opportunities. From a internal perspective, we have all been put on very robust laptops with basically the ability to interact with our in-house systems, literally as though we were at our desks. So everyone has been able to telework. And we've been able to keep up our work because we've been able to do that. So we haven't had really any kind of a lull in our zoning cases or anything else. But the other thing that we've been able to do is to take advantage of all of these platforms, Zoom and Microsoft Team and WebEx, so that we've been able to reach out to our groups using those platforms. We have quite a number of task forces and community groups going at any given time. And yes, it took us a little while to get the hang of it, but at this point we've become sort of masters of it, and we've been able to continue our work that way. None of this change, I don't think, would have happened in anywhere close to the month or two that it took. It would have probably been years in the making. So we've been able to do that. I think there are there are clearly some positives of that, many positives of that, including the fact that most of these platforms have the ability to record. And so people not only don't have to come out to our community meetings, which may be inconvenient, they can watch us from the confines of their cocktail hour, but they also can look at what happened online later at their convenience, which is huge. And the functions that I think Megan alluded to, where they're able to respond to us and provide us feedback any time of the day or night that we can consider, has also been hugely positive for us rather than just having to go to a meeting and figure out how we are going to capture what people at the meeting are telling us. So it has been, I will say our administration has been extremely generous and proactive in setting us up and enabling us to use these platforms to keep our work going and expand our work going with the community. And also with our applicants, we've been able to keep our applicants, the dialogues and negotiations with our applicants on track as well. And I think we'll get to I think you had a different question about our public hearings. I can hit that now or wait for a later question, Greg, at your convenience.
Yeah, if you want to hit public hearings, that works.
Yeah. Hit the public hearings, okay. So at first our board decided almost immediately that they were going to meet. And so we set up the ability for them to meet electronically where they were not in the same room, they were in individual places, and we were out in our own room. For years, we had wanted, and board members and community members had wanted to have public hearings from not only the one boardroom, but from different parts of the county. We have a very large county. It takes an hour to get from some people to get from where they live to our boardroom. It's very inconvenient. Not everybody has a car and everybody can afford to do that. And so we have been not allowed to do that for decades. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, we are now able to have board members not only in different places, but also have testimony by telephone, by video, and now actually we've opened it up to in-person. But the same is for our applicants and for the staff. We've been able to do that both by video and by telephone. And so, and live video, not video recordings. And so it has opened up possibilities that previously we were told could not be possible and has, I think, gone pretty much without a hitch. Yesterday was the first time that the board met back in person. We actually had some people coming in person to testify with their correct social distancing and their masks. But we still have people at the comfort level calling in and providing videos to the board. And so this has been a great advancement for us.
Thanks, Barbara. That was great. And maybe switching to the developer perspective, I know we talked a little bit at the start about some of the changes that we've been working on community engagement. But Dan, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the changes that you've made for cases recently in terms of how you have approached community engagement.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, up until about 3 months ago, we used the traditional methods of town hall meetings, with large lecture formats. We had focus groups sitting around tables talking about ideas. We used the science fair approach, where you have different disciplines in each corner of the room and people can walk around and see what we're trying to do and answer questions. And up until then, we were planning on using more of those in our projects. So immediately we thought, oh, great, just put this on hold for the next whatever, 90 days, 6 months. But as you can see, even today, this method of the webinar has been very, very helpful in that it allows a large audience to partake. I mean, I've been in these webinars that I've been one of 300 people, listening in and having the opportunity to answer questions. It is a bit of a one-way in that we have a limited number of presenters, as we can see here today. But during this, we can send questions that can be answered along the way, and it gives the chance for the panel to see the questions and formulate, I think, a thoughtful answer. The Zoom meeting, as that has now become a noun, just like Kleenex, but the Zoom meetings are the other method that we have been using in smaller groups. I think that's been very effective as well, because you do get the interaction, the live interaction as you discuss the issues, with the presenters. So those two methods for me have been a wonderful addition to trying to communicate to our stakeholders our project and to get feedback, it allows the what we would call the silent majority to take part and to hear about this idea in a better way. I think when you have public meetings, you'll always have the people that oppose you because they want to get up and speak, and you have some people that are interested that are supporters of yours. But for the most part, whether they're undecided or whether they are fine with it but just don't care, you won't have those kind of people take part in the dialogue. And here you can get that in a much better way, I believe. So I think these are great tools to add to our toolbox.
That's a great reminder on question and answer that people have questions as we're going through. Feel free to submit those, and we'll definitely have time at the end to answer questions. And Casey and John, are you seeing similar changes in how you are approaching community engagement?
Yeah, I'll take this one, and whatever the hard question is, ask John on the next one. In terms of, I want to go back and just give credit to Barbara and the other municipalities being able to turn on a dime with these virtual meetings. And from our perspective, it's almost like we never missed a beat. And maybe partially because they embraced the technology, but also people were at home, right? No one was traveling. So sometimes it would take a month to schedule a meeting. We were able to get meetings with staff and just hash through issues very quickly. So, we see, the Zoom meetings as a way to continue things forward. But going back into a year ago, as I started the meeting, we said, we want to be effective and we want to listen, and we embrace this whole process. And so we surveyed the marketplace and ended up linking up with Megan's firm. And so pre-COVID, it set up a community engagement platform for a couple of projects that were early in the process as a way to not replace the process that exists in place with in-person civic association meetings or other types of county or municipal-led meetings, but again, as a complementary thing so that we could have a place where all the data could be. And we have used other, say, social media platforms in the past, but given privacy and other issues, we think that having something that's the sole purpose of what it does is to communicate effectively and to get that feedback. So even if someone didn't see a community meeting, they can go to that website, get a quick update, and then be able to ask questions that we as a developer respond to, and then likewise we can survey. So to me, the fact that this is all happening, we're doing these virtual meetings, it feels like, well, we were already embracing something. Now it's really another way to point people to something to, again, raise that level of engagement, which is what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Casey. And I think that it's interesting to see the, as you said, the quick pivot, I think, by everybody to really embracing all of the different tools that are out there. And, maybe turning it back over to Greg, I think that's a good transition into, the types of people that we are reaching out to and reaching as part of our community engagement efforts.
Thanks, Scott. And I guess I got to come up with a difficult question for John, but in some respects, I think this is the topic we're about to discuss is the topic where we can maybe push ourselves a bit. And it's an interesting, again, intersection, to use that word, that maybe was unintended, that we ended up managing to practical aspects of a pandemic. And in the process, as Barbara alluded to in some of her comments, are finding that the tools that we're using are maybe having the unintended or intended consequence, if you will, of reaching people that have not been historic participants in the land use process. And from my perspective, having been around the process the better part of 3 decades, it doesn't look a whole lot different now pre-pandemic than it did back then. And I would offer the supposition that the fabric and diversity of Northern Virginia is much greater than what we've historically seen in land use processes. And so I'd like to sort of challenge the panel a bit in terms of using some of these tools as a way to increase that diversity, to better reflect the fabric of the communities that we're all trying to be part of. And Barbara, since you sort of led us into that a bit, maybe we'll start with you in terms of the municipal perspective on that, and then we'll continue from there.
So I wish there was a good answer to that. It's been a goal of ours for a long time. We're a very diverse community, as you alluded to. And when you go to a public meeting or even an online chatting meeting, the majority of the people that we see are the same people that, frankly, we've seen for decades. And so the challenge to us, we acknowledge it, the challenge, and we hope to overcome the challenge of how we reach out further. And so we've begun to adopt a lot of strategies to do that. One of them, which is kind of known by go to where the people are, was something that we were putting into place before the COVID. It's a little hard to go into a vacant store in a supermarket now or a shopping center now and expect people to come and interact with you, but we were trying to do those sorts of things. But what we are trying to do is to work through our departments that have closer ties to the communities to figure out how we can disseminate information through them, because they have the ties to the kinds of people who don't normally worry about land use and come into the land use process. But it does remain a challenge. I don't think we have a good answer to that yet, except that we keep trying to push the envelope and use every platform we have available, from Facebook to the next door neighborhood system that people are using, to a much more robust website, to these platforms. And again, making the information as available to people when they can use it at any time of the day, not just having to come to a specific time and place.
So you don't see the proverbial genie going back in the bottle and all this stuff, and some of these tools are hopefully destined to remain. I'll give you a real life example. I mean, we have another client that actually has put a website together for community engagement. It's offered in like 6 languages. And Barbara's smiling, so I think she knows who I'm talking about. But, you know, that to me is blessedly simple and just a place we haven't historically gone. You're nodding your head, so I assume. No,
I think I don't know that I actually know, but you'll share it with me, because it's something we need to do. But then you have to get the people who will then get on it to hear it in the 6 different languages. And that really is the challenge, how you reach them to do it.
Thanks. John, this is your moment. Why don't you give us a perspective on what you've seen in terms of, are we starting to see more diversity as we've now had a few months living with this? And I think, as we sort of teased up front, you guys, to your credit from a corporate perspective, have been leaning into this stuff proportionally harder. So I'd be interested in your perspective on where we've been and where we may go on, I think, what everyone would acknowledge is an important issue.
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay, first of all? It's my first time chiming in. Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Excellent. Well, you know, there's a couple of things to think about. And for us, you know, it's a kind of situation where the jury is still out. I think it's still early in the process. And while adoption in certain submarkets has been fairly strong, you know, I think we all want to find ways to improve the rate of adoption for folks to join our online platforms and join in the discussion that may be a little different than your typical community meeting that many others on the panel have referenced. You know, for us, that's going to take, you know, some creativity. You know, is it mailers that people will actually find the website on to click on? Is it email blasts that hopefully won't find the spam filter? You know, so it's kind of our mission to work with folks like Megan and folks like Barbara to understand, you know, what key things we can do to make sure folks know that there are new resources and ways to communicate effectively. And, you know, for us internally, it's more, obviously one of our main purposes is drumming up new voices from the community and make sure that we truly understand the environment in which we're working. But it's more than that for us. And a lot of it is our ability to analyze, you know, disparate sets of data to make sure that we're building the right thing for the community. You know, everybody obviously knows that developers pride themselves on making all their major investment decisions purely on gut feel. And while we like to do that a lot, you know, increasingly we are leveraging more and more data analyses. And so to the extent that these online platforms and digital pathways for us to gain input from the community allows us to actually point to more data and not just hear the loudest voice in the room or the concentrated voices in the room that we're actually able to make an evening meeting as opposed to taking care of their kids. It allows us to make more informed decisions and help educate, key stakeholders and other decision makers in our communities to say, I know what you're hearing at these public meetings, but here's what the data suggests, and here's why we believe, what we're putting forward, is the best thing for the community and is actually what's being demanded, of our neighbors. And so while I said, the jury is still out, I think it's promising, and I think it's up to all of us on this panel and hopefully attendees as well to figure out how to increase that adoption rate so that we can really create the most, robust data set we can to leverage these new tools.
Thanks, John. Well said. Does anybody worry that, that opportunistic types will simply adapt to this platform, and rather than these tools being used as a technique to improve engagement, you're just going to end up with some sort of proverbial onslaught of electronic communications and that type of thing? And I'd invite really any on the panel to comment.
Greg, I'll speak to that. And maybe because you see I'm gray-haired and been here a long time, I don't ever want these tools to replace live interaction with people. That's what community is all about. And I debate this with the millennials in my firm because they will write an email before picking up a phone and calling me, as many of us have done that. But while this is an enhancement, and I love what John said about getting some more data to better make decisions than the loudest person in the room, we will never let this take over from the community meetings and meeting one-on-one and seeing the dynamic of human interface.
This is Barbara. Can I chime in? I could not agree with Dan more. I think this is really the loss that we're experiencing now, among other kinds of losses, but the loss in this arena is that we don't have that personal contact. You can't see people's faces as well. You can't see their interactions. You can't hear them. Obviously, you can't touch them. But, it's we're losing that by going to this, to the electronic world. It's becoming a very good substitute, but it really does not replace the personal interactions, which I think are so critical, not only in the day-to-day interactions with our staff, with each other, on projects. And so hopefully someday we'll be able to get back to that, because I don't think anything we do is as good as having that.
Well said. Anyone else have a perspective before we sort of close out that part of the discussion?
Greg, just Rob Jackson, just a couple of thoughts. We at the MCA pretty much represent homeowners, and whether they're a single-family home, townhouse, condos. We ourselves are debating, how do we get into the rental community? How do we reach those folks? And I think, whether we're talking about language minorities or ethnic minorities, it's important, I think, not to say, well, I'm here, listen to the person who stands up here, I'm speaking for. I think it's important to get out there and let people, either through an organization where they have said, this is my spokesperson, or directly to get their points of view out there. So I agree with what a lot of people have said. You need to do a lot more outreach, and a lot of that will come from the county itself, as to looking how to get into schools or fairs, or community events, and just explain what is the land use process to people who might not have ever heard of it.
No, thanks, Rob, and I think well said by everyone. And I think the notion that we want to retain these tools, but find that balance. And balance is maybe an overused term, but I think that Barbara said it very well in terms of not losing the historic benefit of the face-to-face, but still continuing to grow and reach and diversify the process. We did have a question from the audience about the notion of would there need to be legislative actions to extend some of these tools and so forth? And I don't know if anyone has a specific perspective on that beyond the emergency dynamic, but I think I sense a consensus from the group that we still need to not, again, as I said earlier, put the genie back in the bottle, but not to put anyone on the spot, but if anyone has got a perspective specific to that legislative side of things. And I, while you're thinking about that, I would suggest that I don't imagine that the experience in other jurisdictions is dissimilar. And it would seem to me that there would be some logic in continuing the ability to meet and accept testimony and accept engagement in these virtual modes. But I'll throw that out to everyone before we sort of close out this part of the discussion.
Most of the things we're talking about, I don't believe we need any legislative change, but I do think once the emergency is over, the fact how the board takes testimony, not in-person testimony, but remote testimony, could need legislative action. And I don't know if you look at it from a legal perspective, but I think it might.
Yeah, and I'll chime in. I agree with Barbara. I don't think for a lot of the traditional type of community engagement that we're talking about, some of the new strategies, we're going to need the legislative fix. But I do think for testimony and potentially continuing to have for the board and planning commissions, you are going to need changes to open meeting laws, and I think that's something that we should all be looking at for the General Assembly session, and whether that's at least here in Virginia, whether that's the special session later this summer or the next session in January.
Thanks, Scott. That's it. While you kind of got the floor, I think I'll pass the baton back to you, and we can get into maybe a sharper point on some of the data and analytical side, which we touched on earlier now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of good points on ways to use the new tools in a very effective way by using some of the data that you're able to collect as part of the community engagement. And Megan, I may turn it over to you. I think you may be in the best position to talk about some of the data and analytics that go along with the new tools that many on the panel are rolling out.
I think one of the biggest surprises to me in this work is that the absence of data can tell as much about community sentiment around a project as the actual data can. So, for example, when you're putting out meeting packets, you might be printing and distributing packets to your counselors or to community members to read, and then taking feedback in those traditional forms. You don't have any sort of understanding of how many people might have read that information but chosen for whatever reason to not provide feedback. But you can track that in the online space. So I remember a project that we were working on that had it was about bike lanes, if I'm recalling correctly, and where to add bike lanes throughout a community. And we saw that 500 people had downloaded the proposed plan for the bike lanes, but only about 10 people had showed up to actually take the survey, and all of their survey responses were similar. And they were similarly negative. So they were taking an anti-bike lane perspective. And that led our clients to think, we don't have the full story here. We have 490 people who we know have downloaded this document and engaged with this project in some meaningful way. We're going to go back to them and say, hey, we have this opportunity to get your feedback, good or bad. It doesn't have to be bad. Please come and let us know what you think about this. And then they were able to tell a little bit more of a complete story to their decision makers. So I think that there's a lot of meaning in that, and being able to track and understand who's actually educating themselves about your product or your project, excuse me. And then from a data and analytics perspective, there's a lot of value in the data that you accumulate when you are doing community engagement over time in the same space. So you're starting to understand how your community across demographic lines is replying to different topics and different types of tools, whether, again, they be surveys or ideation, Q&A. You can track all of those individual touch points over time if you're using a community engagement software. I think, and then in a perfect world, you're able to start to predict and maybe eventually amend your communication strategies based on how you've seen your community respond to topics over time. So there's a lot of fun to be had in the data and community engagement. And I think from a communicator's perspective, where that ends up is changes to how you go out to the community and meet people where they're at, changes to how you display that educational component to make sure that people are feeling really brought along in the process, and you're giving easy to understand information out there into the community. And you can learn all of those things through the data that you collect in the online space.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. That's I think we've certainly seen that, especially over the past few months in the types of data that you're collecting and ways to I think use that to make your community engagement more effective. And I don't know, Dan or I'm sorry, Dan or John, you guys wanted to add in terms of how you're using that data.
I can comment a little bit more on that. And I think one thing that Megan kind of highlighted that I think is really important is that it's not just a developer serving data collection tool, right? I think it's also important for other members of the community to be able to have, obviously one resource that they can go to and trust the data that they're being presented with. What are their community members, suggesting? What are their neighbors saying? What is the actual zoning, allowing at this site in my community? And so I think that's really where we're going to have an opportunity to work very closely with the disparate municipalities that we work with to make sure that, we're providing a central location where people can get accurate information. I think in an era where everyone has a hard time trusting their news outlets and different sources of information, I think to the extent we can work together to collect the data and then represent that data to the broader community, I think that will be super effective in kind of creating a smooth process and getting everyone rowing in the same direction, or at least understanding the challenges that are inherent in a particular project.
Thanks, John. And I don't know, Casey or Dan, anything you wanted to add from the developer perspective?
Well, back on the jurisdictional topic that we were talking about a minute ago, I will say that as has been said before, I applaud Fairfax County. I am doing projects in other parts of the country where the elected officials have decided not to do any kind of approvals right now because they can't meet publicly. And so all you have is some dialogue like this, but there's been no decisions that happened for the last 2 or 3 months. And that has backed up the system immensely. So I don't know how we're going to clear that out, actually, but it is causing some big problems across the country.
The only thing I'll add, Scott, is just piling on to what was previously said a little bit. And I'm going back to something that was mentioned about the in-person meetings. I mean, that's what we thrive on and love. And I think of a charrette I had one time, blank slate, and we had different questions on the walls and Post-it notes. What are the types of things in open space that you would like to see? What are the types of retailers that are not neighborhood you would like to see? And then afterwards, someone on the team has to go take all the Post-it notes, compile all the information, do the roster. Now, we could still do that, but if you also had a tool where it literally just takes it all and populates it, and you can do that story. That's actually just an efficiency. So you're not losing out on it. You're just really adding to it through the simple thing of technology. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example of just how that technology is making everybody's life easier and frankly making the responses more effective. As we're analyzing that data. And I don't know, Barbara, if there's anything on the public side in terms of how you're using these techniques to get a better understanding of the folks you're engaging with and tracking any of the data on your participation and engagement.
So we have a real life example to what Megan alluded to and used as an example. We are working on our zoning, updating our entire zoning ordinance. And it's every provision you can imagine, but there are a couple that have really attracted the attention of our residents, and one of them is accessory dwelling units. So we sent out a survey on accessory dwelling units, and we were able to see the demographics of the people who responded. And we quickly realized that they were hardly a full demographic, and we realized that it missed a large segment, particularly younger people. So it was very skewed to the negative because it was older people who didn't really want to have accessory dwelling units in their communities. So when we were able to look at the analytics, we were then able to target the survey to younger demographics, and all of a sudden it became a very different response in the survey. So it was extremely helpful to have that information available to us.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of using that data to make sure that the responses you're getting are reflective of the broader community, which is always something that I think concerns us. So, sometimes the loudest voices out there are not the ones at diversity that particularly in Fairfax County that exists.
I guess I had one other thing to say about diversity, which is that one of the challenges is that not everybody has the ability to have a laptop or a computer in their home and to use these devices. And that's one of the areas where I don't know that we're still really making inroads. Most people do have a phone. It's a little hard to use GoToMeeting on a phone. But we have to, I think, overcome the challenge of how we get to the people who cannot click on their laptop at night and do a GoToMeeting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and that's actually it's a good sort of transition into our next the next topic which is sort of where we go from here in terms of community engagement. And I think you're exactly right that it's looking at the communities that have historically not participated in the public process and figuring out what are the right strategies for reaching those groups. And some of it is the technology and making it easier for people to engage. But some of it is more low tech and making sure that we're doing the things we need to reach those communities. And so I think it's a very important piece of community engagement moving forward.
Building on that point, and Barbara touched on it earlier when she made the comment, you can put a website in 8 languages, but you still got to get somebody to read it. And I wonder, I want to put it out to the group, I wonder if at times, there is a language of land use that everyone on this panel speaks. And I wonder if there is a way to package the information better to make it more user-friendly and more accessible. I mean, by way of example, I think that if I'm trying to understand what's going on with a land use case, either I've heard about it, I've seen a sign, scuttlebutt in the community. I mean, if I go to the county website and assuming I can even find the case number, I mean, I'm going to find a 55-page development plan. I'm going to find statements that are in planner speak or lawyer speak, no disrespect to the lawyers, myself included. And I'll invite everyone to chime in, but I think there are some municipalities that have packaged the information a little tighter, made it a little more user-friendly. It doesn't completely overcome the technological side, but if you wanted to get a snapshot of what something is about and learn about it, I'd pose the question, is there a better way than the literal nuts and bolts of what we are required to file and what we negotiate in this process?
Greg, I think that kind of falls in our lap. We've got to do a better job on our side as the development community. And if we can embrace that, other than having to have 3 town hall meetings because the jurisdiction required us to do that, and we have to get through and check the block. If we will embrace that and reach out a little better than we have been in the past, and for whatever means you have here, I think we could perhaps do a better job and have a better product.
I'll hop in and
Anyone else have a view?
Yeah, I think that if anyone has to read a long form PDF or plan in any form, and that's their only entry point to participation, then yes, there are many different ways that you can do a better job with that. One is a plain language initiative. I think it's plainlanguage.gov, where you can take the federal government's suggestions or kind of determine them on your own. At my last job, we tried to figure out if we took an informational sheet home, could someone of a roughly 6th grade education read it and understand it enough to get the gist of what's going on to be able to participate? I know that in land use, that makes your job very complex, but any opportunity that you have to synthesize information, to highlight the key points that people need to know, to remove acronyms and jargon, and to really simplify your language before presenting it in a couple of different formats, I think that alone is a way that you can be very inclusive and welcoming with that educational component. Just a quick point about the couple different methods. Videos are great for getting people of different language levels into the conversation, as well as everyone loves a list. So bulleted lists of that educational information is really meaningful as well in the online space. But giving people a couple different ways to synthesize information will help them feel a little bit more connected before they participate.
So we've been trying to post what we call the 5-minute videos, and hopefully they're shorter. But on a topic, I'll keep using accessory dwelling units because I brought that up before. But we have someone do a very short video that explains what it is, explains the pros and cons of the different approaches, and we post those on our website, which in plain language, which hopefully is a way that at least people can understand. If they can find the website and know the problem, at least they can understand what the issues are and form their opinion based on them.
And Rob, I'm interested in your view sort of on the citizen side. What tools do you think are effective in reaching citizens?
Well, kind of playing on some of the things other folks said, people need to know what the land use process is in general terms. I mean, we usually see, a lot of cases we handle maybe 20, 25 applications a year in one form or another. And most of them, it's a few neighbors or that, but every now and then you get a proposal that stirs everybody up. But one of the hardest things to deal with is the fact that you get somebody literally screaming in your ear who doesn't really know, what's permitted in a residential zone, or, what does the Tyson zone mean? What is density? What does FAR mean? Some of this stuff that I think a lot of it, there's just an education process that I don't think community groups can do, but I think, the real estate industry together, working with, Fairfax County government and other localities to kind of explain stuff, because once you get beyond the not over my dead body and, well, we're going to build this come hell or high water, you can start talking, and then you can you can kind of bring the issues into perspective. We had a case in the Mclean Central Community Business District where there's a condominium, and they're going to build a condominium across the street. And it was, well, we don't want anything built there. We would like it the way it is versus, this is my land, I'm going to do it. Finally, the issue got down to having the new building not be higher than the older building. And once we got to that point, the acrimony disappeared, and you really get into, okay, these are the issues. We see your perspective, you see our perspective. But you've got to give people a sense of the rules a little bit, or all they do is get frustrated.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think for some of us who are doing this on a regular basis, it's making sure that everybody has that baseline understanding of the process and the rules that are out there. And you're absolutely right that once you get, I think that baseline of knowledge and understanding, it does make it easier to actually get to a resolution on these issues.
Well, great. I think we're nearing the 3 o'clock hour, or not past the 3 o'clock hour. I guess out of respect for everyone's time, maybe throw out any final comments anyone wants to make. And if not, I guess I took us in, Scott, and I'll defer to you to take us out. But anything else for the good of the cause from the group?
All right. So if anyone has any closing thoughts that they want to pass along, feel free to jump in. But otherwise, really appreciate everybody on the panel today and everybody who joined us in the audience. Really great conversation, and a very timely topic for us as we're going through the development process right now and then moving forward with the uncertainty of when things may get back to a relative normal. I think it is really important to have these types of discussions in terms of how we do outreach, how we move forward with that, how we reach communities that we may not have reached in the past, and also how we balance some of the traditional types of land use community engagement that we've done with some of the new tools. So this is certainly not the end of the conversation, but really appreciate everybody's time and this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Happy to do it. Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.